internet pornography, because of the constant novelty at a click, it is like injecting cocaine directly into the brain. And in fact, some neuroscientists have said it's digital cocaine.
Coming up on British Thought Leaders, Mary Sharpe talks about the damaging impacts of internet porn. Mary says the powerful porn industry will go to great lengths to defend its profits.
This is the same playbook that we've seen being used by other multi-billion-dollar companies, whether it's big oil, it's sugar, the gambling and gaming industries, and we have found it directly with the porn industry.
And the dangers of violent sexual practices young people are learning from porn websites.
You might kill somebody. So even if a girl says to a boy, strangle me and do it tight, he could end up killing her, and that's him, his life is over. Murder, conviction, because in law, you can't consent to death.
Welcome to British Thought Leaders, I'm Lee Hall. Today I'm sitting down with Mary Sharpe, CEO of the Reward Foundation. Mary, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Give us a brief introduction to what the Reward Foundation's mission is and how it achieves it.
Okay, well, first of all, perhaps if I give you the strap line, it's the Reward Foundation, love, sex and the internet. So we try to make people aware of the impact of pornography on the brain, particularly the reward centre. That's why we're called the Reward Foundation, in fact. Because what we want people to be able to have, and I think it's what everybody wants, is a happy, long-lasting, intimate relationship. I mean, we thrive when we have love in our lives, when we feel supported, when we're wanted, when we feel there's a future for us. And unfortunately, the nature of internet pornography is causing a huge risk to that. It's stopping people, particularly young people, wanting to get into relationships. It stops them enjoying sexual relationships, and it becomes compulsive, addictive even for some. And that means they're not getting the benefits of what a loving relationship can bring them.
Before the internet, pornography did exist, but it was kind of seen as a bit immoral, but a kind of thing that existed in the corner, and no one really took too much notice of it. Mm-hmm. What difference has this constant, high-speed, widespread internet access made?
Well, it's made a world of difference. It's completely different from anything human nature or humanity has ever had to face in the past. So, in fact, yes, we know from excavations in Italy that there have been pornography on brothel walls, going back ancient times. So it's always been there. There's always sexual desire is the most powerful appetite that human beings have. And while it's, considered immoral by some, it's mainly a huge health risk. And internet pornography, because of the constant novelty at a click, it is like injecting cocaine directly into the brain. And in fact, some neuroscientists have said it's digital cocaine or digital heroin. Right. And so it affects us in a way, but it's also, it's the ready availability. It's not like in the past when, even like we were young, if people wanted to get hardcore pornography, because we're basically talking hardcore pornography, we're not talking soft focus, nice, sexy, erotic images. We're talking forceful and often violent, as I suspect we'll discuss, pornography that gives huge arousal, a huge shock to the system. And it's anonymous. It seems to be anonymous. It looks like it's anonymous to the user. It can be done in private, doesn't cost anything. And it's there 24/7. So it's completely different from the availability of pornography in the past. And therefore, that impact is significant in what it's doing, particularly to the mental and physical health of users.
Right. I hope we can move on to that, your research into the impacts on the mental and physical health.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things is that pornography is quite different from, say, alcohol because you can see somebody falling about if they've had too much, or drugs, you know, the eyes, the pupils dilate, or, you know, the effects are more obvious. You can't see the effects of pornography. So it tends to be that it's after maybe 8, 9 years of solid use. So if you've got young people starting aged 11 or 12 using pornography on a very regular basis, then it's only when they get to their late teens or early 20s that they start having problems with erectile function, for instance, arousal function. Even if they're with somebody they're really attracted to, their equipment doesn't work. And there's nothing frightens a young man more than erectile dysfunction or impotence. And it's not just this idea, and a lot of them say, oh, it's performance anxiety. Well, actually, they can perform when they see pornography, so the equipment's working, it's just not working for a real person. And the reason it's not working for real life partners is because the brain has been desensitized. It is such a powerful stimulus. Scientists tend to call it a supernormal stimulus. And in fact, that term comes from a Nobel Prize winner, Niklas Tinbergen, when he did experiments with butterflies and with beetles. And he would paint big, huge, bright-coloured butterflies on cardboard. And he found that the males rushed to these cardboard cutouts and tried to mate with them because they looked bigger and better than normal real-life butterflies. And the same happened, actually, noticed with beetles, amber beetles, that the beetles would try to have sex with beer bottles, little stubby beer bottles, that the shape of which and the colour of which was very similar to the female, but much bigger. So it's the exaggerated characteristics, bigger breasts, bigger bottoms, bigger lips, bigger nails, whatever, or bigger genitalia, that to the primitive brain, the emotional limbic brain, says, this is what I want, this is bigger, better fertilization opportunity. The rational brain knows that it's, you know, it's just kind of a make-believe, it's not real, but to the primitive brain, which is really driving things, that seems more important. And that's particularly the case with young people.
Right.
That means that a real live person doesn't do it for them. It's not, no matter how beautiful, how sexually attractive, how much surgery they've had done to them, you're just not as attractive as what technology can produce with pornography. So this is why it's not that they don't want to be attracted to somebody, it's just that the brain has been overstimulated.
What effect does this have on relationship?
So it's affecting relationships in many ways. It's harder for people to get a sustained relationship because if you're used to constant novelty, then you always think there's something better around the corner. And we're seeing this with dating apps, that people become hooked on dating apps. And, you know, if you imagine, you know, you meet somebody online because, hey, you know, why would you bother trying to meet somebody fresh that you might meet in person? It's just convenient to meet somebody online. So you meet somebody online, you get all dolled up, look your best, you go out on a date and you think, hey, I've clicked with this person and we got on really well. But then they don't contact you again. And then that happens again and again and again. And that really affects your self-confidence. And it's particularly affecting women's self-confidence.
So there are other areas of particular impact that you would highlight from your research?
Well, I practiced law for many years and I took time out to go and work at the European Commission in Brussels. And when I went back to law, I was shocked by the rise in sexual crime. Previously, when I had been doing particularly criminal law, there was a lot of drug-related crime. But now it's sex crime is everywhere. Huge amounts of domestic violence. Pornography addiction is cited much more commonly in divorce work, so family law is affected. But the criminal law is a hugely important area. I've been doing some work, specifically some research on the impact of pornography on people with autism, particularly high functioning, so what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, but now it's autism, and it's people without intellectual impairment. So to give you a cultural reference, if you think of Rain Man, people tend to think of autistic people like Raymond in the Rain Man, so he's the autistic savant. But it's much more like Big Bang Theory's Sheldon. Yeah. So the scientist and Penny, you know, it's insistent. And that would be typical of an Aspergery person, very scientific, very rational, also very innocent and sweet, and often emotionally less mature. And they can be very easily manipulated often. And so if they go online, they can be persuaded into behaviours and activities they might not otherwise want to get into, but because they're desperate to find a tribe online. Right. Now, interestingly, the prevalence of autism in the population in general is about 1 to 3%, depending on what you look at. It's a bit more complex for reasons of a thing called virtual autism that I can come back to. But generally, in the population at large, it's reckoned that autism is about 1 to 3%. So 1, 2, or 3 per every 100. But there's a charity called the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, who they're an anti-child abuse charity, it's a child protection charity, and they try to help men, because it's almost always men, who have been downloading indecent images of children, have been charged by the police. 1 to 3% prevalence, at least 25% of the men they see are autistic.
Right.
Now that is huge.
Yeah.
So there's something about the autistic brain that makes them more vulnerable to pornography and more vulnerable to escalating to the illegal material. Mm. Now, what we feel has not really been discussed enough, if I may say, often by the media, and it's not entirely their fault by any means. It's also related to the fact that the porn industry is doing its utmost to stop the key information getting out to a wide public. So the subject hasn't really been covered as much as it could be, because there has been, the porn industry is running interference both in the peer review, so there's not enough information getting out about the impact of pornography on particularly vulnerable groups, but also, you know, it's such an icky topic that a lot of journalists, and I know quite a lot of women journalists, I've been told this specifically, want to cover it because they are seeing the impact of pornography on relationships, and they feel more should be discussed about it, but they get intimidated by porn industry people if they write about it. They will be written to in extremely nasty terms. And in fact, I can give you an example of what happened to me a few years ago. I was contacted by a journalist from The Guardian who was wanting to write about impotence in young men and was porn behind it. So I gave her chapter and verse on a lot of the research, including a very good paper called Park et al. Actually, one of the co-authors was Gary Wilson, that I'll talk about in a moment. He did a paper in 2016, this Park et al., and he did it with 7 US Navy doctors and psychiatrists looking at 3 case studies of men, military men, who had become hooked on pornography. And they tried to get them off pornography. Only 2 were able to give it up. But once they gave it up, their erectile dysfunction went away. Right. And they got their erectile health back. But one of them was totally unable to quit. And this points in some way to the addictive nature of it. But although it was a small sample, it's been incredibly important to understand that just removing that one variable, pornography, caused a change in the erectile health of these men. Now, the porn industry hate that piece of research, and they do everything to do it. So when I was being interviewed by Amy Fleming, who was the woman journalist for The Guardian, she sort of quipped, I hope the porn industry don't come after me with this. I said, well, they certainly will come after you, but, you know, as long as you know in advance that's going to happen, you can do something. Sure enough, within minutes of it going live, I think, online on the Guardian website, they were being bombarded. And for the next 10 days, and I know because I was on holiday, my holiday was being interrupted, this journalist was being bombarded by one of the main porn industry attack dogs, and to demand changes to the article, to demand that that Park et al. Be removed, that any mention of it be removed, that the hot link to the paper, which has been hugely valuable to the readership, be removed. And the editor was involved. And although over the 10 days there were 4 changes made to that article, because it's mentioned, and in the article they sort of say, oh, it was, you know, minor things. But the key point was this very important piece of research was removed. And that was after 10 days of harassment. So this is showing how the porn industry is affecting information to the public. And I'm very grateful to you and to Epoch Times for inviting me to discuss what's happening in the real world as far as getting this research out to the public's concerned, and what's happening to intimidate journalists.
I mean, some of these pornography website companies are massive. They're very rich, very powerful. Can you talk to us a bit more about the role they're playing? You know, you mentioned something about peer review there. It's really interesting to hear about.
Well, I think it's helpful to set it in the context of multi-billion-dollar companies, because we know that back in the 50s, when the research started emerging of a link between smoking and lung cancer, the tobacco industries got very nervous, because if a link could be shown between smoking and lung cancer, that was going to affect their bottom line. The profits were going to take a nosedive if people thought this ultra cool activity, you know, was harmful to them. And so they set up a group. They brought in a guy called John Hill from Hill and Knowlton, who was a PR wizard, to promote a different story. And they developed what was called the playbook. And the playbook is set, it's very much a PR thing. They counter this, they deny the science, they defame activists or educators, health educators, to say that this is in any way harmful. And they disinform with misleading information and fake research, in effect. But it's very much a PR thing, because of course most people aren't going to read science papers. That's too difficult. And also they're expensive. I mean, they're $40 or 30 to 40 pounds per paper. And there are thousands of papers. So unless you're attached to a university or a college or something, you're not going to have free access to those. So most people rely on journalists or newspapers to get, or television, whatever, to get their information. So the big industries, so to use the big tobacco one as the baseline, they actually paid top researchers to find other causes for the lung cancer. It was poverty, it was underlying issues, it was never the tobacco or the nicotine. And it took 30 years, so that's 30 years of huge profits they continue to get before there was a link made or sufficient weight of evidence to suggest that it was the smoking was causing the lung cancer. And even then, of course, people can use it, nobody's trying to ban it, but governments make a lot of money from the taxes. But the thing was that this playbook was established, and they did it by going on talk shows. They had their scientists denying, or they had PR whiz kids who were, you know, very slick in how they were getting their message across. But they were also running interference in the peer review system, right, apart from attacking individuals. Well, this is the same playbook that we've seen being used by other multi-billion-dollar companies, whether it's big oil, it's sugar, the gambling and gaming industries, and we have found it directly with the porn industry. So I've given you an example of us being attacked directly. That was just one small example a few years ago. The most recent example is for the past 7 years, we've been accredited by the Royal College of General Practitioners, who are family doctors. And so we have a course, a one-day course, for healthcare or other professionals, or anybody basically who needs to understand the science, what's going on. And we've developed this course, and we did it in person for years, and we were accredited for that. But then with COVID, we realised we really needed to have an online course. So for a year, we put together this course. I interviewed 7 experts on different areas, working with different people, with men, with women, with couples, with children, LGBT groups, you know, the neuroscientists who are doing the research, neurosurgeons, psychologists, a whole range of people. And we got the evidence from them about, you know, what they were seeing at the sharp end. Well, the porn industry don't like it, do they? Because what they fear the most is that the secular community, the scientists, say that porn is harmful. Now, the World Health Organization has, well, in 2018, they brought out the latest revision of the International Classification of Diseases, ICD-11. And that actually is bigger and more important, if you like, than the DSM-5. A lot of people talk about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, which is the American Psychiatric Association, APA's commercial book. You spend hundreds of dollars on that. And that's no longer supported, in fact, by the NIH in the States, National Institutes of Health, because it's not as evidence-based as it should be. But the World Health Organization's equivalent, in fact, older and more prestigious, but often not referred to, I have to say, often by journalists. They tend to talk of the DSM-5. But the ICD-11, for the first time, introduced compulsive sexual behaviour disorder as a category, as a health category. And we see from the research that more than 80% of people seeking treatment for compulsive sexual behaviour disorder have a porn-related issue. So we were speaking at a conference, the International Conference on Behavioural Addictions, last year in South Korea. And there was a discussion in one of the panels amongst the world-leading neuroscientists, and they said that pornography absolutely should be considered as an addictive disorder and in its own right. So that we may see that further down. It was interesting that the APA, when the DSM-5 came out in 2013, that they didn't mention. They mentioned gaming and gambling as addictive disorders, but not sex or pornography. Various reasons around that. Variety of political influences, apparently, you know, insurance companies, all kinds of different things. But the important thing was, although everybody, even in 2013, thought that pornography should be included, it wasn't. So it wasn't until 2018. Now, during that time, the porn industry lobbied extremely hard, because it was actually an open process. You could see it online in the preparation for this ICD-11 manual coming out, that the porn industry were pushing extremely hard for it not to appear as a separate category. And they succeeded to a certain extent. Now, it's strange in a way, because sex is the #1 driver of human behaviour after puberty. Food before then, but then sex even trumps food after that. And gaming and gambling are secondary rewards, they're secondary issues. Yet this key driver that is affecting mental and physical behaviour is not getting the due focus it needs, because of the interference of the porn industry. Now, we also know, talking about peer review papers, that scientists, some scientists are lucky to get their papers through, but a lot of what we see happening is that porn industry associates, so people very close to the porn industry, are somehow coming on to teams, helping with teams, and they're watering down the effects. So when the research comes out that looks quite strong that porn use, particularly amongst younger people, is an issue, they will say, oh no, it's more this. I think we should do this. So we're seeing changes in even the peer review stuff. So that's influencing the professionals and the academics, because people think that academia is independent. It's not. It's being influenced by money. And, we're finding out more evidence of some of this. We're finding that some young researchers who are really keen to work on pornography because they're seeing how it's impacting on their friends and so forth, or perhaps on themselves. They want to, work in this field. Suddenly they get a huge sum of money to go and study some other area of behavioural addiction, and it takes them away. I just wonder where some of that money's coming from. I'm just very suspicious. So that is taking out the opposition before they even get too far off the starting blocks. In other ways, there's we've talked about the impact on mental health, on physical health, a little bit on the criminality. I would say that there's a dramatic rise in domestic violence and sexual offending. And one of the worst areas is child on child sexual abuse. Now, we speak a lot in schools, and we've also developed lesson plans that are free to download from our website or the Times Educational Supplement website. And these explain how the adolescent brain works. We also talk about sexting. Sexting isn't a legal term, but sending nude pictures, basically. But because kids are being exposed to pornography at such a young age, they think that sending nude images and being coercive and pushy about that are normal, because that's what they're seeing online.
We've seen also a rise in the interest in violent sexual acts. Can you talk about that?
Strangulation, for instance, is one of the most common tropes seen in pornography today. So young people are learning choking's a great idea. And from a physiological point of view, when you restrict somebody's jugular vein, it's not just and the neck, constrict the neck. There's a whole range of physiological things going on there. There's blood flow to the brain and there's air flow. Now, restricting air for a few minutes, even, you can hold your breath for a couple of minutes. It's not going to kill you, far from it. But if you restrict the blood supply that goes to the brain and out of the brain, you can pass out within 4 seconds. And that's indicative already of brain damage. Now, interestingly, in 2019, the Sunday Times did a survey across the board of porn and, its use and how people were responding. And they found that in Gen Z, so people under 23 basically, twice as many young women said they preferred BDSM and rough sex compared to men. There was 38% of the young women compared to 19% of the men said they preferred that. Now, that is interesting. But this is what they're learning from pornography. That didn't happen 15, 20 years ago, or certainly beyond that. It, hardcore, nasty stuff like that you just didn't see. But now it's everywhere. Everybody that's got a phone can access that. Children can access that. And that really impacts on the brain. So this is very interesting, I think, from the sex education perspective. One of the things we say is that you have to teach properly about consent. As a lawyer, I can tell you that in criminal cases and sex education, consent and belief that consent was given is the most important thing. But this means that if you're teaching consent, meaning would you like to do this, and it's being conducted in a state of an inebriation, then you're going to say yes to pretty much anything. And without realising that this isn't true consent in the sense you don't know what harm is going to do to you. You might kill somebody. So even if a girl says to a boy, strangle me and do it tight, he could end up killing her, and that's him, his life is over. Murder, conviction, because in law, you can't consent to death. So if he says, oh, but she consented to it, she asked me to do it, that isn't going to work. So young men have got to realise, young women have got to realise, but teachers in schools and parents have got to teach what the nature of real consent is. It's not just saying, would you like to do this and is it okay? And can we be a bit adventurous? It's about the medical and legal, and sorry to get a bit technical, but that's the nature, particularly if somebody goes to court, of what consent is really about. And we need to teach that. But interestingly, a lot of, when the UK government made sex education compulsory in schools 2 years ago, there was a rush of people, I'd say, with political agendas who were going to be teaching this. Because teachers who teach English and maths don't want to be teaching about pornography in schools. They much prefer to have outside people come in. And the pupils often prefer external providers coming in to teach about this. And so these people are teaching about kink and BDSM and how to give consent to this type of material. Now, what's been quite interesting, again, is that parents really don't want their 14-year-olds learning about this kind of stuff. And so when they've asked schools, can I see the materials? The companies say to the head teacher, you can't see them because that would be in breach of our copyright or intellectual property. I mean, where's the safeguarding there? So there's been a bit of a backlash, and I think the Conservative government, last week, actually 2 weeks ago, brought out rules saying that, that had to stop and that there had to be a change.
Do you think, you mentioned about the media not kind of really doing as much as they could. Do you think we'll reach the point where they kind of have to, with all these different things coming together?
Well, it's interesting that there's a very good new book out. We've got a copy of it here by Jonathan Hyde called The Anxious Generation. Just came out a couple of weeks ago. And he is a social scientist at New York University, and he's been doing fabulous work for years about this, but about how since smartphones basically became common and widespread, how there's been a huge rise in anxiety and mental health disorders amongst young people, particularly young women. Young women tend to use social media more and they get obsessed with their looks and so forth. But with young men, it's more pornography and gaming. Young women, it's social media and pornography. And they're just becoming more and more anxious. But he explains a lot of the reasons for this and a lot of the science around this. So he's well regarded, well respected, well known, and he's getting a lot of publicity. So there are a lot of journalists talking about that, which is great. He does mention pornography a little bit in his book. But if you really want to know the impacts, then I recommend this book, Your Brain on Porn, Internet Pornography and the Emerging Science of Addiction by, sadly, the late Gary Wilson. He was one of our colleagues. He's the one who was involved with that Park et al. Paper I mentioned with the US Navy doctors. And he did a TEDx talk back in 2012 called The Great Porn Experiment. And it's had over 16 million views. And that helped hundreds of thousands of young men and women, and older men and women too for that matter, understand how porn was affecting them. But the porn industry went after him on a daily basis. Right. And he died really in his mid-60s, prematurely. He did have some underlying health issues, but they were exacerbated by the daily lies and disinformation promulgated by the porn industry to try and break him down. And it really affected his health at the end of the day. So I'm hoping that between Jonathan Haidt's books like Your Brain on Porn, that explain the science and the research, and as people first of all, journalists will pay attention, learn about that, and so that when the porn industry inevitably put their shills, put their activists out there to counter it, that journalists will have enough knowledge to ask the right questions, to counter the lies and spin of the porn industry, so that the right information will get out. Because I know it's very difficult for journalists and for the media. I've done a certain amount of journalism. I used to work at the European Commission in Brussels, and after I did a legal job, I was involved in communications, speech writing, and writing articles for commissioners and so forth. And there's this need to be seen to be fair and balanced. But there's a false equivalency. The amount of evidence against porn is really high. The amount of evidence for porn is very low, and it's largely funded by the porn industry. But if you present two experts and they both say there's a problem, one says there's a problem with porn, the other says there's no problem with porn, it's other things, the public think, well, the experts can't make up their mind, so I'll just do it. So by that stage, the porn industry's won, because all they need to do is create doubt in the mind of the public or decision makers. People are very reluctant to be certain about anything. But there are some harms that are clear-cut. That's why the porn industry went after that Park et al. Paper, I am sure, because it showed causation. And Jonathan Hyde is showing causation between social media use and mental illness. It's causative, it's not just correlational. And so that's why they're doing their damnedest to interfere with the peer review system and with journalists. So I hope journalists will educate themselves, because this problem is only getting bigger and it's not going away. I mentioned earlier about the child and child sexual abuse. The National Crime Agency recently came out and said that the majority of child and child sexual abuse, the majority of child sexual abuse material is perpetrated by children. People think it's the stranger dangers, these dirty old men in raincoats, or it's guys on the internet and going to the dark web. Sure, there's an element of that, and the more people get hooked on porn and escalate as their brain desensitizes and go for younger and younger models and into the illegal material, which is on the legal porn sites, by the way. They don't need to go to the dark web. The more that people are getting hooked, the more that they can go for this. But the fact is that children are getting hooked and they're using it, and then you've got older people going to use child sex abuse material. So, and that's devastating. The long-term impacts of this is significant. So it's affecting children's ability to learn at school. It's causing constant sexual fantasy, the porn. They're not sleeping properly, they're not integrating socially. If you can get all your jollies on the internet, why do you even bother going out and trying to meet people? On the other hand, the more sexually adventurous ones want to act out what they've been seeing. So we see two distinct groups. So journalists are going to, I hope, take on board the need to educate themselves. And I think these two books are very valuable in educating them about what the issues are, and so they can ask the right questions and be aware that the porn industry, the multi-billion-dollar porn industry, is using journalists to get to the public, and they've got to be extra aware of the role that they have, the hugely important role in educating the public at large.
In terms of parents, maybe they're worried that children are getting sucked into these things. What can they do?
Again, educate themselves. Number one, they have to educate themselves. Again, we'd recommend Gary's book, but also on our website, we have a free parent's guide to internet pornography that's got tons of resources. Most of them are free resources. The main thing is not to blame and shame children. They're going to be exposed. If you think that your kid's never going to watch porn or isn't going to watch porn, you're wrong. And most children say, again, lots of research by whether it's the children's charities or whatever, children, or the Children's Commissioner for England and Wales, they're saying that children want their parents to give them boundaries and to be more protective. We know that going into schools. Sometimes we've done things like a digital detox, and the kids are saying, oh, this is great, because then we can blame you or the teachers that we're not allowed to use our phones for 24 hours because I want to get on with my homework and my pals at school keep bombarding me with things. So I really wish, this is what the kids were giving us as feedback, I wish there were more boundaries around that. Parents need to be aware that they need to give their kids boundaries. Now, you hear horror stories of parents saying, my son will wreck the house if I try to take the phone away from him. And I don't think that happens in every household, but the fact is that will happen among some people. But that shows you how hooked the kids are and how much they need help. So if a child, we've on our website, we have a thing called the Brief Pornography Screener, which is a 5-point questionnaire that was designed by, again, world-leading neuroscientists and clinicians on 5 simple questions that you can ask with answers in the back. And if you get more than a certain score, you know you've got a problem and you need help. So that can be dealt with in schools, or parents can do that. And I say download it from our website. And it means that you're doing something early, because with adolescents, they're in this period of accelerated learning when the brain is strengthening the neural pathways that they're using most often. Now, if they're studying, they're doing sport, they're interacting with other kids, they're learning a variety of skills, great, those are the neural pathways that are strengthened. But if they're spending 8 hours a day online, you know, gaming and gambling, or well, not so much gambling perhaps, but gaming and doing porn and social media, those are the pathways. And then as the brain develops, it prunes back the unused pathways, or the potential pathways, the nerve connections. And this means that it's going to be harder to learn those skills past the age of 20, early 20s to mid 20s. It's going to be harder beyond that. It's going to be harder to change behaviour. So if you get hooked in your teen years, it's going to be harder to unhook. So this is why parents have got to realise in a way that the whole of society is being groomed by big technology. It's been a stealth movement. And sure, there are many benefits to technology, but not all the time. But it is actually designed to be addictive. Designed. And that, Jonathan Haidt talks about that. But we know that in the 1990s at Stanford University, the neuroscientists were using the latest neuroscience to teach the new tech entrepreneurs how to make their product sticky, to make it addictive. And it was all about the reward centre of the brain, the thing called the nucleus accumbens. And one of the students of this, BJ Fogg, was one of the co-founders of Instagram. We're talking 2 billion members. So he did something right to get people hooked. So this is understanding how the brain works. So we feel that parents need to learn about the adolescent brain. And Gary's book, again, does a brilliant job of that. And once they understand that, then they can decide how they can give help and a framework to children and to offer them other experiences.
The final thing I'd like to ask you is, what change would you like to see, whether it's parenting, society or the law? If you could bring about one change, what would it be?
I would say teaching about the adolescent brain. You know, people think, oh, it's too complicated, it's too complicated. No, you don't need to know about the internal combustion engine to drive a car. You learn some basic mechanics to drive a car. It's the same with the brain. You don't need to be a brain surgeon to understand appetites. You know, that we know that when we're hungry, our stomach, you know, rumbles and we want food, and the longer we don't get it, the hungrier we are, and the more likely to grab on things. It's the same with sex. But we need love, we need touch, we need safe touch. And kids are not learning that. If they're only learning online, they're not learning real life intimacy and connection. But the kids have got to, this has got to come from them. So if I could change one thing, I would make teaching about the reward system of the brain compulsory in schools, compulsory across society, because it affects adults. And it's the one thing that, whether it's advertising that makes us eat the foods that make us obese, or you know, it's learning to strengthen the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, which is immature in young people and only matures, you know, over the teens and into the early 20s and beyond that. But if we can strengthen that, people can get back in touch with their own free will. The greatest gift that human beings have is free will. But we're robbed of our free will if we become addicted to anything, or even if we just develop problematic use. So the more we can strengthen a young person, and as I say, any person, but particularly young people, because they're going through that period of accelerated learning, if we can teach people how to make better choices for their own well-being, I think we'll have a much better society.
Mary Sharpe, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lee.